Congress has until the end of this week to reach a deal to avoid a partial government shutdown. Now, if lawmakers fail to do so, funding for several departments, including Homeland Security and the IRS, will run out. I'm sure some Americans won't mind that. Scott MacFarlane joins us now, our congressional correspondent. Scott, you're tracking everything. Where exactly do the negotiations and the discussions stand?
They have saved the thorniest, trickiest issue for last, like a procrastinating college student. This Homeland Security funding has always been the trickiest for the U.S. House to navigate, and that's what they've got to get done to avert a partial shutdown by Friday midnight. It's because it involves funding border security, border agents, all the things that are so synthesized into the 2024 campaign, and all of which are such wedge issues right now between the two parties. You see there all the agencies that can be funded by the end of the week, and it must be funded to avoid this shutdown. Big ones like the Pentagon, like justice programs. But Bob, the reporting we have today is that it's Homeland Security funding that right now has held up progress, and they're running out of time to make progress.
Scott, walk us through the calendar.
Yeah, it's not a pretty sight. You sure you want to go down that path? They have until Friday to figure out how to fund these agencies, but there are other deadlines between now and then. Typically, you have to give the U.S. House 3 full days, 72 hours to review text once it's on paper. And right now it's not yet on paper, and we're getting close to 72 hours away. What's more, the Senate can do what it does, throw up procedural hurdles or procedural issues that can stretch the calendar further. All of this still must be done by midnight on Friday. I'll note one thing. There's a shred of optimism among those who don't want to see a standoff. Next week is Congress's spring break, and they tend not to want to mess with their own district work periods.
Which members are you watching on those talks? Who really has power? Who has say over the final deal?
So much of this is centralized with leadership because the U.S. House is working around its normal procedures. The narrow margins in the House mean they need a tidal wave of Democratic votes to get anything done, which is a novel concept to this Congress. So all of this is centralized. Typically, this would go through committees like the Rules Committee. The appropriators would have a lot of say. The Rules Committee, to a degree, is irrelevant right now because they're not following typical rules. This comes down to the Speaker of the House and either one of two, the Senate Democratic leader or the White House. Who is he talking to at any moment of time will dictate how fast this gets done.
Is Speaker Johnson getting any pressure to have a shutdown?
There's a voice from the House Freedom Caucus, which has been consistent from the jump on this. And when I say the jump, I mean September 30th, when all these standoffs began. And in a letter they issued as the evening began tonight in Washington, they asked their members to toe a hard line against these spending bills unless there are policy changes to border security, something they've been championing from the start of the impasses. They're doing so again. They're the dissenting voices who I think may say, better there be a shutdown than for us to come up short on changes at the border.
And CBS News has obtained surveillance video showing what appears to be people erecting gallows and a noose, which was seen during the January 6th attack on the Capitol. What exactly do we know about what is a new development here, what's worth paying attention to?
It's one of the few stubborn mysteries that remains from January 6th. Who erected those gallows, that horrific sight from the west front of the Capitol? This video here, exclusive to CBS News, shows the movement of the pieces of the gallows from the 6 a.m. hour, Bob. 6 a.m. January 6th. There they are going across Union Square. And what the House subcommittee investigating January 6th tells CBS News is that this construction began shortly before 7 a.m., hours before the White House ellipse speech, hours before Mike Pence was called upon to overturn the results of a lawfully held election. And the question is now, who are these people and how has it been 3 years since they've been found? A fuller version of that footage available on CBSNews.com as members still try to answer that very intransigent question.
You've been speaking to lawmakers about a lot of these issues.
The chairman of the House subcommittee, Barry Loudermilk of Georgia, says this is a pressing issue for his panel. Take a listen more of what he had to say.
This is before the massive crowds got to the Capitol. There were plenty of Capitol Police there. We've reviewed the radio traffic of Capitol Police that day, and there's no mention of it. Even though the crossbar of the gallows wasn't erected until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the base platform was there. And that in itself is against Capitol Police policy and rules.
Let me add one more note, Bob. We've reviewed 1,300 January 6 criminal cases. 1,300. Not a one references anybody alleged to have taken part in that gallows, at least not yet.
Scott MacFarlane, thanks for being here. We really appreciate your reporting.